Hey everybody, Chuck with Functional Fly Tying. Today's fly is going to be one that I think almost everybody has probably fished with at one time or another. A little bit of a challenge to tie, but a lot of fun and very useful, and that is the Stimulator. Works great as a hopper imitation. You can use it as almost any kind of terrestrial depending on how you choose to use color on your dubbings. Also a great fly to run a hopper-dropper combination with, and so probably not a fly that the first-time novice wants to jump into, but for intermediates it's certainly within your tying range. But there are a couple of tricks to making these flies look the way that you want them to, and so we're going to go ahead and talk about some of those things. Ready? Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and tie in some pale yellow thread. Leave about 2 to 3 millimeters behind the hook eye. And then I'm going to go ahead and wind back for about 1/8 of an inch or so. Come forward a couple of turns and trim away my excess. This first step is an optional step, something I like to do for my own flies. As I mentioned before, I do like to use these in a hopper-dropper setup, and so what I want to do is I want to create a loop that I can tie in my dropper with. And the reason I do this is because when you're fishing with barbless hooks and you try to tie in that second part of tippet onto the hook down near between where the barb would be and the bend, on a barbless hook, a lot of times that mono will try to slip off. So by tying in this loop here, you can tie in your tippet and not have to worry about that happening. I'm using 3X tippet here for the loop, and then usually what I'll do is I'll run a little strand of 3X coming off of this to give it enough stiffness to stay away from the hook from getting it fouled, and then I'll usually run a lighter tippet down there. So I've gone ahead and just wound back about to the point where the hook barb would be, and now I'm going to run this back forward to ensure that I get a good secure wrap on there, and then I'm going to take the very tips of that from where I tied in, and I'm going to pull those back, and I'm going to bind those down, and that's really going to lock this in so that you don't have to worry about having that nylon pull out of there. Now I'm at a point here where I'm at about 5/8 of the length of the shank, and that is exactly where I want to be to start with tying in my tail. I want that tail to also serve as the platform for the body, so I've already pre-cut a section of elk hair, and I'm going to go ahead now put this in the stacker, because for this fly you do like to have those nice even tips. For a lot of flies, I'm not a fan of having that real paintbrush type of look to it, but on these it does look good. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the measurement on this. I like my tails on these to be just slightly longer than the gap of the hook. That's about how much I like to have coming off the back. So for this, if I bring the body back to where my left thumbnail is, that's the length that I'm looking for. So now I'm lining this up to see where the tail is going to stop. It's right there. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that away. And then I'm going to go ahead and tie that in. And what I'm doing is I'm grabbing small sections of it, kind of cutting in with the thread, and then binding down. My thread pressure on my bobbin slipped for just a second there. But what I've done is I've never stopped pinching on the elk hair, so you can always have control over what's happening. Alright, so I've got the basics tied in on that, and you can see that with heavier thread pressure that elk hair really wants to flare out. Now on some flies that may be what you want, but on the tail of this I want it to be a little bit more streamlined. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that hair slightly up, and with more open turns I'm going to make my way towards the hook bend. But then as I get back to the point where I'm just about ready to finish my abdomen, I'm going to back off on that thread pressure just a little bit. I'm going to take it from about a 7 or an 8 down to about a 3 or a 4. And now if you notice, that thread doesn't flare anywhere near as much. Then I'll come back forward with just a couple of turns and then give it a little bit of torque just to make sure everything's in good shape. So now I have that tail sitting right up on top. It's not going to roll on me, and I've got a nice body taper to serve as the platform for my abdomen. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tie in my hackle feather, and as I've said, there's an endless number of combinations you can use for the coloration on both the abdomen and the thorax to head area, as well as the hackles. I'm going to take a barred ginger hackle for this one. I'm going to tie this one pretty traditional. We're going to go ahead and go with the cream colored abdomen with the orange thorax, and I'm holding that hackle in at about a 40 to 45 degree angle, and I'm giving it a couple good turns. And as I do that, that hackle stem, as I wind forward, that hackle stem is coming right up underneath the body. So once I've got that locked in with 4 or 5 turns, I'll come in and just trim away that excess. I could have wrapped it all the way up with 8/0 thread, but I don't want to. I don't like to put too many turns of thread in, especially on dry flies, because you're trying to keep your weight to a minimum. Now, the abdomen on this is Ice Dub UV in a light yellow, and Ice Dub is great stuff. The UV offers a really nice little sparkle to it. The problem that I see for a lot of people with using this stuff, though, is they try to use too much, and when you try to put too much on the thread, it really tends to want to twist, roll, and then separate off of the thread. So you're much better off to go ahead, put less material on there, make a couple extra turns, and then come back and add a little more on. See, if you keep everything quite sparse, then it binds onto the thread quite nicely. So I'm going to bring this forward. I'm going to give it just a little bit more. Now the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is dubbing waxes, and you can use waxes if you like. Again, on dry flies I don't like to do it because it tends to just coat down all of the material in the abdomen, and I like it to be able to capture little air pockets rather than just be a solid clump of material. So I will almost always try to avoid using any sort of wax in at this point. So I've got that in. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my hackle. Now, for the hackle size itself, this is a size 10 hook. When I'm wrapping body hackles, my general rule is I like to come down 2 sizes on the hackle gauge from what the hook size is. So on a size 10 hook, I chose a size 14 hackle, and this is a saddle hackle, so it's a little bit longer, lets me put more wraps in. Then I'll go ahead, tie that off, and trim away the excess. Another tip, when you're going ahead and you are going to trim away a feather that you've tied off on the bottom side of the hook and your thread is on the underside, you don't want to risk cutting your thread, so I'll rotate the fly out 90 to 180 degrees. That way the thread is no longer near where I'm going to trim away, and I don't make that fatal mistake. Now I'm going to come in right along the top, and I'm going to give it a reverse mohawk. And what I'm doing is I'm just cutting a little channel out of here so that when we put the next layer of elk hair in there for the wing, it'll sit much more low across the abdomen and give you that look you want. Otherwise, those hackle fibers will have a tendency to push everything up. And now for the second half, this is almost a dead repeat of the first half of the fly, with the exception that I'm going to give this even just a little bit more sparkle, get it noticed, by taking a strand of pearl crystal flash. I folded it, cut it in half, and then I'm going to take that crystal flash, bring it around the back side of the thread, and then bring both ends around in front and hold everything in my left hand. Then I'm going to bring my thread straight up so it's directly above the top of the hook, drag that crystal flash down, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wind back a little bit to bind that crystal flash down. Now right now it's going to want to pop up, and that's okay, because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and lay the elk hair in on top of it, and that'll keep it down. Now I'm coming forward here a little bit, and I'm doing something I don't often do, and that is I'm taking just a bunch of turns of thread in here. Normally I don't like to just make turns of thread for the sake of doing that, but in this case what we're doing is we're creating a little bit of a ramp to tie in the wing. So I'm going to go ahead and take this crystal flash and I'm going to cut it more or less just a little bit shy of the tail. And now I'm going to take a larger clump of elk hair, and this is something where you want to, this is a high flotation fly, so you want to have a good amount of elk hair on there, but you don't want to get too carried away. So good idea is to take the amount that you thought was going to be the right amount, line it up to the fly. If it's right, great, but what you're probably going to find is you need to take away a third to a half of what you had on there before. This, from a volume standpoint, is just about right. So now I'm going to go ahead, and again I'm going to get those little under fur fibers out of there. And stack the hair. And I want the length of this, I want the length of the wing to come back to half to 2/3 the length of the tail. So now I have that, I've got my length set, And I want this to come back to just short of where I initially tied the thread in. So now I have my length all set. I know where I want it to stop. And once again, pre-cut that, bring my thread forward to where I'm going to tie that in. One section, 2, and 3. Now if you're more comfortable with just using a standard pinch wrap there and you can get it to hold, that's great. This is just a way that I've done it, and I find I have better success with it. I have that kind of captured. Now I'm going to go with a couple more open turns so that I can make my way back a little bit. And again, as I get close to where the abdomen is, I know that's where the wing's going to start to sit. Now I'm going to go with that slightly looser wrap to bring it down without having it flare like crazy. Come back forward and then bring some more thread tension in to hold everything securely in place. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this from the top. I want that to come over just a little bit. Bring it back, and overall I'm pretty happy with the profile that I've got. I've got just a few little stubs showing up here, but I'm not worried about those because as I go ahead and tie in the thorax and then the front hackle, a lot of that stuff is going to get taken away. So the forward hackle is going to be just a straight grizzly hackle. And I'm going to follow in and tie that in exactly the same way that I did with the first one. And I'm going to wind back, and I'm going to come back, and I'm making sure that my thread wraps come back to the point where I'm not having a gap between the abdomen and the thorax. So go ahead. I've got that tied in, and now I'm going to take some orange dubbing, and you could, if you have ice dub in an orange color, that's fine. This stuff is called crystal opossum, and it works almost exactly the same way. It doesn't have the UV feature to it that the ice dub does. But as far as being a synthetic and coming onto the thread in a similar way, they're almost identical. So now I'm going to take a couple of turns, and again, bring those turns back just a little bit to make sure that there's no gap between the abdomen and the thorax. And now you can see I didn't tie off, or I didn't trim away the extra bit of the butt of the hackle, but I don't need to because I've cut it short enough where now it's just going to get folded right up in underneath. We'll add a little bit more here. This is one of the areas where most tires, especially newer tires, make their biggest mistake, and that is trying to load as much dubbing as possible on and trying to put as much material on the hook in general. Almost always, less is going to be more because it gives you greater control at the end, and you're not worried about what's going to happen if you jam up the area behind the hook eye. So now I have the thorax in. I'm happy with that. The hackle on this one, the front hackle, I go down one size rather than two. So for a size 10, this is a size 12 hackle. And it's going to look almost like a size 10, and the reason for that is that the bulk that the elk hair gives you underneath increases the diameter of the hook itself and consequently makes it act like a bigger hackle. So I'll go ahead and I'll get 5 turns on there, come in on at the bottom, tie that off, about 3 turns, rotate the thread away, come in and tie that, and now I'll just take my fingers, brush those hackle fibers back, and then I've got room to build a nice head. Take my whip finish, different people have different philosophies on whether or not to use cement on a trout fly, or especially a dry. My feeling is that from a whip finish perspective, if you don't like to use cement, do at least 2 whip finishes, and if you're using half hitches, then go with probably 5 or 6 of them and really snug up each one. So there it is. I've got 1 stray fiber of orange that I want to get out of there. And there you go. There's your stimulator. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching my video. I'd really appreciate your feedback. If there are things that you'd like to see, flies you'd like to see tied, or even comments about how I can make these videos better, please let me know. Email is chuck@functionalfly.com, or you can leave a comment in the comments below. Thanks. Have a good one, and we'll see you again soon.